Hello, students. I am Samuel, sir, and we are going to do the third chapter in your book known as Fundamentals of Physical Geography. The name of the chapter is Interior of the Earth, and this is the first part of the two parts of this chapter. The video is in it. I recommend that you watch the second part also. Now, when we say what is in the inside of the earth, right? So this chapter is about that how to know, how do we know what is there inside the earth. Now the radius of the earth is some 6,370 kilometers, and it's not possible for us to reach the center to make observations or collect samples. So our knowledge is essentially based on estimates and inferences. Now part of the information is obtained through direct observations and analysis of materials. So when we say direct sources, we have the following direct sources. One is mines, but we are not possible to dig beyond 3 or 4 kilometers because of the increasing heat. When you keep on digging deeper and deeper, the heat becomes intolerable, and that way human beings can go only till 4 kilometers. There is a mine called as Po Neng mine in South Africa, which is some 4 kilometers deep. Then the second one is deep sea drilling project, and there's a place called Kola, and there the deepest drilling done till now is 12 kilometers. So at every depth, maybe at every few hundred meters, the scientists collect some samples of the soil and send it for analysis. Now the third direct source is the volcanic eruption. Now in this, magma is analyzed. There's lava coming out from the volcano, and when it comes out, we call it as magma. Since it's coming from in the interior of the earth, it can tell us a lot about what is there inside when we analyze the magma. But still, it is not possible for us to say from what depth the magma is coming out. This is that mine I told you about, that called as Amponeng gold mine. This is some 4 kilometers deep. This diagram is about deep ocean drilling. This is a volcano erupting, and in the foreground you can see the magma. Now there are some indirect sources of knowing what is there inside the earth. One is to study the physical parameters. Now we study the physical parameters such as temperature and pressure. They keep on increasing with increasing depth. Also, the density of matter keeps on increasing with increasing depth. So when the scientists get some material, they calculate the density in laboratory, and from that they come to some inferences that this could have come from such a depth. It is possible to find out the rate of change of these characteristics uh, graphically or by calculations. Now, one interesting indirect source of knowing what is inside the Earth is meteor. Now, meteor are there in the space and they fall to the surface of the planet. But the logic behind studying meteor and inferring what is there inside the Earth is because the origin of Earth and origin of the meteors are almost the same. So when we study meteors, we get a good idea of what the Earth might be containing. Therefore, the study of meteors is done. Now, there's a debate that the color of meteors is depending on the chemical composition. Another indirect source of knowing what is there inside the Earth is to study the gravitational pull. This gravitational force is not the same on different parts of the surface of Earth. It is greater near the poles and lesser at the equator because the distance between the equator and the center is more. because the Earth is not exact spherical; it is flattened at the poles. Now, G value also differs according to the mass of the material. The uneven distribution of mass of material influences this value. Now, here's an instrument that is known as gravimeter. This is used for calculating the G value. Now, if the G value is different from what is expected, then it means it is showing something which is there uh, immediately below your feet, or in that same line between your feet and the core of the earth, and that is causing a difference in the G value. The reading of gravity at different places is influenced by many factors, and these readings differ from expected values. Now, if the difference is there from the expected values, we call that as the gravity anomaly. You expect some value and you get some other value. Now, that abnormality is known as gravity anomaly. Now, gravity anomalies give us information about the distribution of mass of material in the crust of the earth. There are some more indirect sources. One is magnetic field. Now, the survey of magnetic field also provides information about the distribution of magnetic materials in the crustal portion. In this way, it provides information about the distribution of such materials. You know that the core of the Earth is made up of nickel and iron, NiFe, NiFe. Both are magnetic substances. So, if such substances are also found in the crust, the uppermost layer. The scientists study the magnetic field lines. The next indirect source is the seismic activity. The seismic activity is the activity of the tectonic plates, which causes earthquakes and plate movements. Now, here's an instrument used for measuring the magnetic field strength. Here's a portable seismograph. You can call that as portable because when you see the handle, you can judge the size of this instrument. It must be something like a suitcase, maybe a large suitcase. This is used for measuring the seismic waves or the earthquake activities. Now, an earthquake is a natural event in which the earth shakes. The study of seismic waves provide a complete picture of the layered interior of the earth. Now imagine that you have a stack of books on your table, quite a high stack, maybe 2 feet high, and you have books of different thickness. Some of them are only sheets of paper. Some of them are very thick cardboard, and some of them are somewhere in between. And when you shake this stack of notebooks or books, the way they will shake is directly depending on the material there. Some papers are of less density, some are of more density. Some of them are the paper is weak, some of it is strong. Some of the cardboard is really thick, some of them are really thin. So when you study the shaking of the stack of notebooks, you get an idea of what the stack consisted of. Similar is with the earthquake. When the earth shakes in earthquake, the seismic waves they provide a picture of the layers of earth. So why does the earth shake? To understand this, you snap your finger. Just take your finger, your middle finger or your ring finger, and press it to your thumb and go like that. Snap, snap, snap. So why does this sound come, and why is it possible for you to snap? Because when you are pressing your middle finger or your ring finger on your thumb, you are applying pressure, and suddenly you are changing the direction of that pressure, and your middle finger or your ring finger snaps on the finger which is immediately below it and produces the sound. Exactly, something like this happens in an earthquake. There's a fault. A fault is a sharp break in the crustal rock, and energy is released along that fault, right? So there's a sudden release of energy, and that release of energy gives rise to earthquake. Rocks along a fault tend to move in opposite directions, and as the underlying rock strata presses them, the friction locks them together. Their tendency to move apart overcomes the friction, and suddenly it overcomes, and so the rocks get deformed and they slide past one another abruptly, suddenly, and that gives rise to earthquake. Here's a diagrammatic representation of tectonic plates slipping past each other, and it's happening at the fault line. And at the fault line, below the surface of the Earth, there's a uh, place where the energy is released. That place is known as hypocenter or the focus. And the point immediately on the surface of Earth above it is known as epicenter. Now, what we just spoke of releases energy, and this energy travels in all directions. It's like throwing a stone in water, and you watch the ripples. The ripples are traveling in a circles, concentric circles, and they're traveling in all directions. But remember, here it's happening below the surface of the Earth. The point where the energy is released is called the focus of an earthquake. It is also called as hypocenter. And energy waves travel in different directions, reach the surface. The point on the surface which is nearest to or directly above the focus is called epicenter, and it is the first one to experience the waves. Now, after the waves reach the surface, they spread in horizontal direction. They cause movement in the rocks. All natural earthquakes take place in the lithosphere, and a seismograph records the waves reaching the surface. The curve of an earthquake shows three distinct sections, and each represent different types of wave patterns. So, if you were to take the paper from a seismograph, you will be able to see these things. From left to right, from left you have the first P wave. P wave is the primary wave, and that's a small wave, and it causes pushing action. Then comes the secondary wave. S stands for secondary, P stands for primary. So primary wave comes first, recorded gets recorded on the seismograph first. Then the secondary wave gets recorded. Now this primary and secondary waves, remember, they are happening below the surface of the earth. That is the reason they are known as body waves. Body stands for the body of the earth. And at the epicenter, these P waves and S waves reach the surface of the earth. And so these waves, which are bigger and more intense with stronger energy, these ones are known as surface waves. So you have two types of body waves. Body waves are the waves which are generated below the surface of the earth. They are generated due to the release of energy at the focus, and they move in all directions, traveling through the body of the earth. They interact with the surface rocks and generate a new set of waves called the surface waves. The velocity of waves changes as they travel through material with different densities. Now, to understand this, sonography. So, if a patient goes for sonography, the doctor or the sonographer makes that person drink a lot of water. The reason is water is a very good conductor of sound waves, and the density of, let us say somebody wants to know the kidney stones, the density of the stones is very different from the water the person has consumed. So there's a difference between the densities. So the sound waves will travel differently through different densities, and that will give the picture of the kidney stones on the computer screen. Something similar happens here also. The denser the material, the higher the velocity, and their direction also changes as they reflect. Sometimes they reflect. The sound waves, the earthquake waves in our case, get reflected or refract. Refract means they pass through an object of different density, and then it gets bent at a certain angle. We already know that there are two types of body waves known as P waves, the primary waves, and S waves, the secondary waves. Now, P waves, they move faster and are first to arrive at the surface. That is why they are known as primary waves. And P waves are similar to sound waves. They can travel through gases, they can travel through liquids or even solids. But the S waves are not like that. S waves arrive at the surface after a gap of some time. That is why they are known as secondary waves. They are the second to come, get recorded. Now, secondary waves can travel only through solid materials. Now, this property of S waves or the secondary waves is important. You will see shortly, just after a few slides. Now, this has helped scientists to understand the structure of the interior of the Earth. Now, like I told you, after a few slides, you will be able to understand what these two sentences say. Now, the reflection causes waves to rebound, and the refraction makes waves to move in a different direction. And this can be found out on the seismograph. You just place the seismograph wherever you want to take the observations, and the seismograph will record these waves. The surface waves report last on the seismograph. The reason they are more destructive is because they have a lot of energy, and they have a lot of energy, and they do a lot of displacement, and the displacement happens on the surface where the living things live. Human beings live, the animals and plants are living on the surface, and you have the constructions of buildings on the surface. And because these waves are having a lot of energy, they shake it terribly, and it causes a lot of damage to life and property. Now, propagation of earthquake waves. Now, different types of waves travel in different manner. As they move, they cause vibration in the body of rocks through which they pass. Now, P waves, the primary waves, vibrate parallel to the direction of the waves. Whichever way the waves are traveling, primary waves are traveling parallel to that. And this puts pressure on the material in the direction of propagation. That is why they are also known as pushing waves. So it creates density differences in the material, leading to stretching and squeezing of the material. Because it's like, you have a maybe a volleyball or a cricket ball or a balloon, and you press that with your hand. When you do that, you are causing stretching and squeezing of that ball or the balloon. S waves or secondary waves and surface waves, they vibrate perpendicular, that is at 90 degree to the direction of the propagation. If they are traveling straight, they create pressure on left and right, top and bottom at 90 degrees. Now, S waves vibrate in perpendicular direction to the wave direction in the vertical plane, so they create trough and crests in the material through which they pass. Now, seismograph records the earthquake waves. Now we're talking about shadow zones. This is an important concept we should know. But there are some areas, specific areas, where these waves are not at all reported. Means if you put a seismograph there, the seismograph will not record anything. Now that such an area is known as shadow zone. For each earthquake, there exists an altogether different shadow zone. You cannot predict where the earthquake is going to come in reasonable time. And if you keep a seismograph there, some places the waves are recorded, and some places the waves are not recorded. So the place where the waves are not at all recorded are known as shadow zones. Now look at these two diagrams. On the left hand side, we have a diagram showing shadow zones. Now here, the center is the core of the earth. And imagine that right on the top, the earthquake originated, the P wave originated, and they traveled through the crust, through the mantle, and some of it traveled through the core. So the ones which traveled through the crust and mantle got deflected at 105 degrees on either side. So if you keep a seismograph anywhere from the top portion to 105, that's the yellow portion, it will record the waves, the primary waves, anywhere on the earth. But between 105 degrees and 145 degrees on either side, if you keep the seismograph, it will not record any waves. So this wave, this dark brown color, is known as the P wave shadow zone. That is, if you keep a seismograph there, the seismograph will not record anything. Then again, between 145 degrees and 145 degrees on either side, again when you keep a seismograph there, it will record the waves. That is about the primary waves. Now let us look at the secondary waves. Now in secondary waves, if the epicenter is on the top, just like in the case of primary, the first diagram, the secondary waves will go and reach till 105 degrees on either side, but nowhere else. This blue zone below this blue curve is not at all recording the secondary waves. That means this blue area, this blue zone, this outer curvature is the shadow zone for S waves. Now if you just remember, just a few slides back, I told you we'll be talking more about this. The S waves, the secondary waves, are not able to propagate through liquids. It means what? The core of the earth is a liquid. If the core of the earth is consisting mainly of nickel and iron, Nife core, it means the nickel and iron in the core are in molten form, in liquid form. And that can happen only at very high temperatures and very high pressures. The temperature will be equal to the melting point of or higher than the melting point of nickel and cobalt, nickel and iron, sorry. This is the inference we draw from studying the primary waves and secondary waves. Now, the same thing which I told you is written here. Seismographs located at any distance between 105 degrees from the epicenter recorded the arrival of both P waves and S waves. But beyond 145 degrees, the seismograph from the epicenter, the seismograph recorded the arrival of P waves, but not the S waves. So the zone between 105 and 145 from the epicenter is known as shadow zone for both the types of waves. The entire region between beyond 105 degrees does not receive the secondary waves. The shadow zone of secondary waves is much bigger than that of the primary waves, that blue zone which you just saw. The shadow zone of primary waves appear as a band around the earth between 105 and 145 degrees away from the epicenter. The shadow zones of secondary wave is much larger in extent. It is also a little over 40% of the earth's surface. So from this statement we understand that if an earthquake occurs anywhere on the globe, on anywhere on earth, anywhere else on the earth which in a place which is not a shadow zone, there also the seismographs will be able to record the earthquakes. Now, these are the following five types of earthquake. Tectonic earthquake is due to sliding of rocks along a fault plane. Volcanic earthquakes are confined to areas of active volcanoes, and this is a special class of tectonic earthquake which takes place because of volcanic activity. A collapse earthquake is almost artificial. The number three, number four, and number five are artificial earthquakes. If there is a mine and the roof suddenly collapses, there is an earthquake on the surface. But its extent is only till the surface area of the mine. Explosion, if it is caused like a nuclear device or a chemical device which is exploded underground, it will cause an earthquake, a minor earthquake on the surface of Earth. If there's a large dam, because a large dam will contain billions of tons of water and millions of tons of concrete, and it's been putting pressure on that land for such a long time, they will also induce earthquakes. These are known as reservoir induced earthquakes. Now, how to measure earthquake? You know that the magnitude is measured on the Richter scale and it's expressed in numbers between 0 and 10. 0 is no earthquake and 10 is a very big earthquake. And all the numbers between 0 and 10 are exponentially 10 times higher than the previous number. For example, if there's an earthquake with magnitude Richter scale 5 and another earthquake with magnitude Richter scale 4, the one with magnitude 5 is 10 times containing 10 times more energy than Richter 4 scale. Now, by magnitude, this relates to the energy released during the quake. Now, if you go by intensity, it is measured on Mercalli scale and is expressed in numbers 1 to 12, and this takes into account the visible damage caused by the earthquake. These are the hazardous effects of earthquake. Earthquakes of high magnitude, which are more than 8 on Richter square scale, are quite rare and they occur once in 1 or 2 years. But tiny ones keep on occurring every minute. Yes, there are some 1 million tremors recorded every year when you consider the entire earth. There are some 10 lakh earthquakes. If you divide that by 365, you can get the number of earthquakes happening every day. Not all parts of the globe experience major shocks, though, although, and high magnitude tremors can cause heavy damage. This photograph on the left and on the right, they show a street scene before an earthquake and after an earthquake. This is the end of part 1 of this chapter. Be sure to watch the part 2 also. Give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you shortly in part 2.